My cottage cheese pie recipe is easy and delicious. With just a few ingredients but a ton of flavor, this old-fashioned dessert recipe is one you definitely want to try. Let's go over the ingredients. For the filling, you will need 1.5 cups of small curd cottage cheese, full fat, 170 grams. You can use large curd if you want, but I definitely would not use reduced fat or fat-free cottage cheese. You want the full fat kind. To that, I'm going to add some sugar. I'm going to start off with half of a cup of white sugar, 120 grams, but I have another half a cup off to the side. I'm going to add the first half of a cup and then taste it and see what I think. So I will let you know what I decide. For more flavor, I'm also going to add 1 teaspoon of vanilla, 1 tablespoon of lemon juice, 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt, 2 tablespoons of cornstarch, 20 grams to thicken the filling, and 2 large eggs to bind everything together. I'm going to pour the filling into an unbaked 9-inch pie crust that's off to the side. Of course, as always, I'm using a homemade pie crust, but you can use a refrigerated ready-made one if you want. Like I said, my old-fashioned cottage cheese pie recipe is super easy. All we have to do is just mix the ingredients together for the filling, pour that into the unbaked pie shell, and then put it into the oven. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to put in the cottage cheese. I'll scrape that later. And then the first half a cup of sugar, not the eggs, because I'm going to taste it and I want to be able to taste it without having to worry about eating raw eggs. So the flavorings are going to go in. Now I'm going to give this a stir and then taste it, and I'm going to see if I think it needs more sugar. I tasted the filling and it's good, it's sweet, but I think it needs a little more sweetness, so I'm going to add a 1/4 cup of sugar, 60 grams. That extra 1/4 cup did the trick, so we'll say 3¼ cups of sugar. I almost forgot the cornstarch, so like I said, 2 tablespoons. Like I said, I'm happy with how the filling tastes, so now I'm going to add in the 2 eggs. As I said earlier, if you've never made a pie before, a custard pie like this, or you're making a casserole that has eggs, I highly recommend tasting it before adding the eggs, because you can always adjust the recipe, but once you add in the eggs, then you're basically stuck with what you have. Now that the cottage cheese filling is ready, I'm just literally going to pour it into the unbaked pie shell. And now I'm going to put this pie into the oven uncovered at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for, I'm guessing, 45 minutes, but I will let you know. And as always, it's a good idea to put the pie on, in this case, a pizza pan or a cookie sheet, because then it'll be a lot easier to take in and out of the oven. Especially when the filling is as liquidy as this, it's easy to splash it around. I just pulled my cottage cheese pie out of the oven. It was in at 350 degrees Fahrenheit, uncovered, for 50 minutes. 50. As I waited for the pie to cool down enough so that I could cut it and give it a try, I couldn't help but notice the very unique look. When I started making this pie, I wasn't expecting the cottage cheese curds to hold their shape. But as you can see, most of them definitely did, giving the filling a very interesting contrast between the white cheese curds and the pale yellow custard that is pale yellow because of the egg yolks. Considering this pie's interesting appearance, I couldn't wait to dig in and give it a try. So when I cut the first slice and took the first bite, I was really surprised because this pie was definitely delicious. The flavor is very hard to describe. I think the best way to describe the flavor of this cottage cheese pie would be a cheesecake but with less acidity. Don't get me wrong, there definitely was a little bit of acidity or sourness in the background. I think cottage cheese naturally has a little bit of tang and lemon juice is sour, so it makes sense for there to be at least a little bit. But compared to a normal cheesecake, this pie definitely had less tanginess in the background, giving it an overall cleaner taste, if that makes sense. I know you're probably wondering if it tasted like cottage cheese. The answer is yes, it did taste like cottage cheese, but it tasted like a cottage cheese cheesecake with a little bit less tang in the background than you would expect. I thought that 3/4 of a cup of sugar was perfect. It was sweet enough for me, maybe a little bit less sweet than a normal cheesecake, but like I said, I thought that was a perfect amount of sweetness to complement the amazing flavor. Now let's talk about the texture. Now that I'm holding the first slice up to the camera, you can see the small curds of cottage cheese and how they, for the most part, held their shape. And even though it's hard to see on camera, there were actually 2 layers in the filling. On top, there were curds of cottage cheese, and on the bottom, there was this filling that was creamy and soft. I guess it was made up of mostly cottage cheese curds that had disintegrated or just the liquid that had come off of the curds. It was absolutely fantastic. It was probably the most delicious part of the pie. And as you can see, the pie crust was perfectly golden brown, and my homemade pie crust with a little bit of butter contrasted very nicely with the cottage cheese filling. One thing I did want to mention is that even though I did add lemon juice to the pie filling, I didn't feel like the lemon flavor was that strong. If you want a really strong lemon flavor, I would add about 1 tablespoon of lemon zest, but honestly, like I said, I thought this pie tasted great as it was. Even though I really liked how my old-fashioned cottage cheese pie recipe turned out, I did want to mention that the texture was a bit different. Like I already said, most of the curds stayed whole, and I could definitely feel them in my mouth as I ate this pie. I like cottage cheese, but if you don't like the texture of cottage cheese, you probably won't like this pie. I'm curious how this recipe would turn out if you blended all the ingredients together. That would probably solve the texture problem. So if you make this pie and you blend the filling smooth, let me know how it turns out. Also, like I said, the milky layer on the bottom is what I really liked. So I wonder if you can make a pie just with that milk that's drained off of cottage cheese. That's something to try in the future. In short, I know that cottage cheese pie sounds very strange, but I'm glad I gave this recipe a try because I loved it. It was a lot better than I was expecting. So if you're looking for an old-fashioned dessert that's a bit different, this is one to try. As always, thanks for watching. See you next time.